Hey, what's up everybody? It's Dan here again from Launch Academy, here to bring you another episode of the HTML show. And today we're gonna continue to flesh out some of the skill listings that we're working on and hopefully get into some of the job experience before we part ways and start to dive into deeper areas of the resume. If you have questions or you're going through the process of integrating your own theme, I encourage you to join in on the conversation on Slack. And as always, show your work so that we can help you and give you critique on the semantic structure of your HTML and how you're approaching your CSS. All right, so let's dive in. We're going to be all business today and just jump right in. All right, so when last we left, we filled out this sort of programming skills section of the resume, kind of inspired by the template that we found on Theme Forest earlier in the series. We're going to actually skip over the graphic skills just because I don't think it's going to be relevant for most of you who are producing development resumes. And what we're going to do is we're going to adapt this language skills section here today to reflect some of the methodologies that we teach here at Launch Academy in your proficiency with those methodologies. So we're going to kind of adapt this languages progress indicator with 5 dots, and we're going to make that more so sort of a focus on the methodologies that we teach here at Launch Academy. All right, so let's go ahead and do that. So the first thing that we're going to need to do is we're going to need to separate my programming skills section with that section. And it looks like there's just white space. There's really no hard section mark or anything like that. So we can go ahead and just throw in another H4 that's consistent with the programming skills header. So we're going to say here, H4 methodologies. And again, we're going to go through the process of just mocking up the HTML semantic nature of what we're trying to accomplish here. Again, we're going to use an unordered list. And we're going to list things out like TDD, which is test-driven development. So you write automated tests before you write any implementation or any code. Really cool methodology. Paired programming is something we also teach, where you teach or you learn to code with another student alongside you, and you actually kind of trade places from the perspective of either being a hands-on coder or what we call the navigator, which is somebody that's kind of giving an overarching perspective of how your code and architecture is coming along. And we'll also include things like pull request workflow. And we'll also throw in here wireframing, why not? Okay, so we've got these marked up, but what we want to do is we want to show dots for our levels of proficiency. And there are multiple ways that we can accomplish this, but I'm going to actually use Font Awesome as a way to accomplish this because they have a circle section here. So we're going to use this circle font icon as a means to basically emulate the behavior that we're seeing here. I'm not particularly fond of the underline, so we're going to eliminate that, but we are going to show these dots, and then we'll have our own interpretation of an area that's left open for the dots that represent sort of 4 out of 5. This is the 1 out of 5 and the 2 out of 5 for French. So this is what we're going to do here using the Font Awesome icons that we have available to us that we integrated in a previous episode. All right, so to do that, I'm somewhat constrained by the markup that Font Awesome requires us to use. So we're going to say FA circle. I believe it's, yeah, just circle. Good. Okay. And we're going to say that we're 4 out of 5 proficient for that. So we need to duplicate that, and then we're going to use iClass equals FA. And we're going to use an empty circle, also provided to us by Font Awesome. We'll use the circle thin. All right, so let's see how that looks. And already you can kind of see it coming together. Obviously, we've got some CSS work and styling to do, but for the most part, that's looking fairly decent. So I'm going to go ahead and focus on creating the first one so that it looks the same, and then we'll propagate those changes down to the similar elements thereafter. All right, so let's get this TDD line looking like the English line that we see here. Okay, so the first thing that we need to do is we need to get rid of the disks that show up as part of the unordered list. So I'm going to have to give this a special class or even an ID. So we could say ID equals methodologies. Make sure I spell it right. And we're going to open up our CSS and we're going to start to do our work. And again, I'm going to try to keep it contextual to where I am on the HTML page with like elements, so I'm going to do that. And I'm going to say list style none, and I'm also going to say margin 0 and padding 0. Because if you notice, if we use the Chrome inspector here, we see that the unordered list has both margin and padding. And that might be undesirable for us right now, so I'm just going to set those to 0 for now. And we may decide to change it down the line. Okay, so those are lined up well. My TDD text doesn't look really all that special. I might try to have it resemble what it looks like here with Ruby. So I'm going to go ahead and make this, for example, a P tag. And I'm using the ID-based selector here to isolate the paragraphs only within the methodologies unordered list. And I'm going to say font weight bold. And we'll kind of mimic some of the things that we used here. Now let's see how that looks. Okay, that's good. Now notice because I integrated a P tag, now my TDD line is clearing, which is somewhat undesirable. But before I address that, let's kind of look at how this system kind of works. Okay, so there's probably a static width being set on the language skills. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to say that I want to display this as an inline block, and I want the min width to be 200 pixels. And let's see how that affects our display here. So 200 pixels is too much, so we probably want to make it, let's split it in half and see how that does. That's not bad. But notice here that we're pretty close to the text itself. And one thing that we want to consider is we've got some long names here, so we want to make sure that we don't give too much give. So we might say max width 150 px. So there's a little bit of wiggle room there. So we're setting a min and a max. And I'm going to actually make the font weight, the font size of our text here a little smaller than normal. Give us a little more wiggle room. There we go. And how are we looking? I'm going to still, I think that's okay. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually opt to right justify our language skills. See how that looks. Got some work to do there. Let's get rid of this font size adjustment that I made. Okay, I actually starting to like this a little bit better. And we'll set a margin right to 0.2 REMs. Let's see how that goes. Maybe a little bit more. And let's see how that goes as we propagate the changes. So I'm going to leave it as it is right now, and then we'll see how that looks aesthetically when we integrate the changes with the other 3 list items here. But first I want to address the color of this display and probably make the bullets themselves a little bit larger and more aesthetically pleasing. So to do that, I'm going to actually need to set a span. And we'll call these circle proficiency indicators. That's really a long class name, so I'll probably just change it to proficiency indicators. All right. Methodologies. Notice how much I'm using copy and paste as I work through this. It's really important to eliminate the possibility of typos. And one thing that I'm just always looking to do is always try to reduce the possibility of human error. So I use copy and paste quite a bit so that I don't make typographical errors in correlating my HTML elements with CSS selectors. Okay, so I'm going to set the color here. We'll do a light gold. Why don't we do that? See how that looks. Not bad, not bad. And now I'm going to make the font size a little bit larger. I will make that 1.5 REMs. Great, but now see, I've got this sort of misalignment issue happening, which is not ideal. So we're gonna have to set some heights here in order to accommodate that because we're dealing with separate elements here. So what I could do is I could set some behaviors on the list item itself. Let's give that a shot and see how that works. We may get mixed results. So we'll say min height, and we'll say 1.5 REM, because we want that REM reflection, right? Give a little bit of room, and I'm going to set vertical align to middle so that everything looks decent. Let's see how that works. And again, it didn't really get me the aesthetic that I was looking for. I might need to set vertical align on the P tag as well. And I might actually need to set the height of my paragraph tag to mimic this min height as well. Let's see how that works. And there we go. Okay, so the TDD now lines up with the bullets. So I've got a fairly decently working straw man here. So now that my markup is sort of straightened out, I can now propagate this approach down the list. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. And span, and I'm just going to go ahead and copy this. And I'm just basically applying the same pattern, and I'm going to adjust some of the progress indicators here to simulate different proficiencies for different methodologies. And down the list we go. Okay, that's pretty cool, but you'll notice a couple things here. First of all, because we have a long title here, we're wrapping, and we've also got quite a bit of height in between these items, which is not ideal. And that looks to be a function of the paragraph's margin, or maybe it's padding. Let's find out. No, it's margin. Okay, so we're going to adjust the margin of the paragraph tag. And we're going to keep our selectors square here. See how that looks? That's a little better. Did I set a... right. I want this to be my right margin here. I accidentally set that 0.4 as bottom margin, which threw all my alignment off. There we go. Okay. So I'm going to actually change this line to be just pull requests. Sometimes you have to modify the content to fit the design consideration that you have here. So rather than trying to make this text wrap nicely, the simpler solution is to just change the content itself. Okay, that's looking great. I'm pretty happy with this. Just to get some variance, why don't we just actually change our proficiency for pull requests. Let's see what that looks like. Yeah, so it's an interesting graphic. And notice here we've got some color variance, so we may want to set some alt here. So I'm going to set my proficiency indicators for pair programming. I'm going to say is alt 1. Or we'll just make it alt and we'll alternate the colors here. And we'll make these aqua. Or even light blue. Let's see how that looks. Make it a little more aesthetically interesting. So methodologies, proficiency indicators, alt. We're going to set the color. Oops, did I set background color? I meant to set the color. That's interesting that it would set. Huh. So for some reason this is interpreting this to set the background color, which it shouldn't have done. I wanted to set the actual color of the I tags here. Oh, because I misspelled or mistyped my proficiency indicators. So there's that typographical error I was cautioning everyone about. Let's see if that gets us to a better place. Interesting. So let's inspect this and find out what's going on. So see here, I've got an overzealous CSS selector because I've got an alt tag here that's setting the background color. That's an offending or unideal situation, probably a result of these progress indicators. So I need to set that to be more selective. And this can happen as you keep adding on CSS, where classes start to collide with one another. So you have to be cognizant that you're in a system that's changing and dynamic. So we may need to refactor this so that we isolate these progress indicators, but not affect the methodologies listing. So pretty cool, realistic, real world thing that could happen here. So we're gonna find that .alt, and we're gonna make it a little more specific. And there we go. We don't lose the aesthetic value of the progress indicator, but we successfully kind of modify the alt here versus the alt that's found in the programming skills section. Very cool. Now notice here as well, we've got some additional margin in the pair programming. Actually looks like it's misaligned with the rest of the column here, which is really less than ideal. And that's a function of this being a really long piece of text. So because we need pair and programming here, I'm gonna actually make the font size a little bit smaller. So we'll go ahead and make the font size 0.8 REMs, see if that helps our alignment issue. That actually made it larger. So let's try 0.6. And now we've got alignment, which is significantly better. And there we go. So that does it for the methodology section. So we're ready to move on to the employment section. And here in the employment section, I'm just going to get the first 2 bullets set up here. We may be able to get through an actual setup here, but we'll take it as far as we can for the next 5-10 minutes, and we'll pick up at the next episode. So this employment header is unlike anything else that we've implemented to date. So we need that downward arrow, and we need a headline that's set up this way. And I'm gonna set this up as a different section. And again, we're gonna get our markup right, and then we're gonna stylize the section. So I'm gonna do that for this particular area here. So believe it or not, it actually makes sense to use an H4 here as well, because this is a part of the outline. So we're going to do a section with an H4 tag. Resume component. So I'm going to create a new resume component. Well, one thing I should do first is just make sure we've got valid markup. So I'm going to go ahead and run what I've just done through the W3C validator. So I'm using the web developer toolbar here. We've got that warning that we spoke about in the previous episode, but that's okay. Otherwise, we're valid, so we can proceed. So we've got this section resume component. Paradigm here. And I'm going to use an H4, and I'm going to say employment, or we're going to use professional experience per our sample resume. I don't like, there we go, that's better. Okay, so we want to get this professional experience header looking similar to what we have here. So the first thing first, we got to make sure that we're mirroring the pattern that we've incorporated here, because it looks a little different. Section class resume component. So I'm just looking here and making sure that we're appropriately set up. Interesting. So we're going to actually put this in resume detail, because we're not actually setting up another button-like element. So notice up here, we had the profile box and the resume box, but here we're doing something a little bit different, where we're just setting up a new employment line. So the treatment here is a little bit different from what we saw earlier on in the sample. Okay. So let's see if that gets us a little bit closer. And it does. But we're going to treat this H4 a little bit differently because it's going to have to mimic this sort of selection. So we're going to give it a special name, and we're going to call this a experience headline, because we're going to do something similar down the line for your education. So these are contextually experience oriented, so it makes sense to do it that way. So we'll set this as experience. And now our objective is to use CSS to make this look similar. Okay, so in order to do that, first we've got to kind of map our expectations from a coloring standpoint. I think what we'll use is a darker gray. All right, so let's go ahead and do that. So we're going to say h4.experience. And we're going to set a background color of that darker gray that we used in the progress bar. So I'm going to search for background color and look for that gray that we're using. Let's do that. See if that gets us the color that we're looking for. Oops, typo. That's the gold. Not really the aesthetic that we're going for, though I'm gonna save that because I'm gonna use it for the button down the line. So I'm gonna inspect this element up here and get the actual CSS that I'm looking for, which is 888. And I'm gonna make the color white and the font weight bold. Add my semicolon, and there we go. Progress. Okay. So I'm going to add some padding here to increase the white space around the item. It's probably a little too much. That's not bad. And now I'm going to set the need for this down arrow, and I'm going to use Font Awesome for that as well. So I'm just going to search for an icon that is going to give me that toggle down kind of perspective. I think that's actually pretty dead on. Caret down. Yeah, caret down works. So this icon, we'll do the chevron down. Why don't we do that? So we're going to do a chevron down in our markup. And that's looking fairly decent. But what I need to do now is I need to stylize this eye itself to give it a different color. So we're going to put that in a new style sheet rule. And remember I said we were going to save this for later. We're going to take that and bring it down. We're going to make the color white. Well, it's already white from the experience headline here. So let's see what that looks like. That's not great. I'm not psyched about that. So see how the background is wrapping around? That's because of the padding that we have on the whole element. So what we need to do is we need to actually split up this H4 into spans. So I'm going to throw this span in here. So now I'm going to apply all of these rules to the span itself. And I'm gonna need to move the padding in all of these rules up to the H4 itself. So I've disambiguated the colors. And hopefully we get rid of that gray wrapping around, which we did. Excellent, okay. Not fantastic again here, because now we lose that padding. So I think what we need to do is actually move this padding and duplicate it. Not bad, but not great again. So there looks like there's white space for some reason in between these. So we need to eliminate that. When you're dealing with inline elements, they can be white space sensitive. So that's what we're dealing with there. All right. So now we want to make these flush. And we also want to use the border radius to give this a little bit rounder edge to it. So we're going to say border radius. See if that gives us the so we've rounded those corners, but see, we still have this height related issue where we want the headline to kind of wrap or envelop the carrot. So first we're going to set the width, or the min width, to 30px. That's too much. And we're going to text align center. That's a little better, coming along, making a little more headway. Okay, so let's move this background color to the H4 and see what happens. Ah, there we go. That's a little bit better than what we were seeing. And we adjust the margin for the eye to have a subtle, say, 2 pixel on the left. So we're going to need 0, 2 pixels on the left, and then 0, and then say 10 pixels on the right there. Oh, I've got these backwards. So I want the 10 pixels on the right and the 2 pixels on the left. Actually, I want to eliminate that left completely. And that's a little bit better. And what we'll have to do is actually mirror the radius on the left so that we don't get those little square, those little triangles of gray. And that will probably make this look very close to what we have here. And that will finish us off for today. So on my H4, I need to set the the top left-hand corner and the bottom left-hand corner to reflect this border radius. So we're gonna do that. Because I wanna eliminate those little triangles of gray on the left of this item. But I only wanna do that on the top left and the top right. And I forget how these are positioned, so I'm gonna have to play around with them quite a bit. So it looks like it starts at the left. And there we go. So see the difference? Now those little gray triangles no longer appear. And we've got a pretty decent aesthetic that is inspired by that design. So we'll pick up from here in the next episode where we'll start to fill in actual jobs as the next section in our responsive resume. We'll see you next time. Thanks. Bye-bye.